Welcome, everyone. Uh, Welcome to the First Chesapeake FTC Town Hall. I'm Alex Bryant, the Executive Director of First Chesapeake. Joining me tonight are our Director of FTC, Shelley Stoddard, and Senior Director of FTC for First Inspires, Rachel Moore. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. We really appreciate it, and we're excited to share what we have and take some questions at the end. So tonight we want to be transparent about the things that we faced and what it takes to do event planning and how we make some of these decisions and really where we look to the community to engage with us. And I think most importantly, we want to discuss how we can really work together collaboratively to make the future of FTC and the First Chesapeake even stronger. So next, I'll go through the agenda for tonight. We're going to try and keep it to 45 minutes for this presentation so we can save most of the time for Q&A at the end, but happy to dive in here. So at the top, we're going to start talking about navigating challenges together. Really want to express our shared disappointment and talking about steps to committing to the future. And then Shelley's going to go through the kind of road to making these events possible, kind of showing you how the sausage is made and letting you in on the inside here, so we can really showcase what we're doing, areas that we could improve on, ways where you could plug in. We're going to talk about judging, and we're so thankful to have Rachel and Joanne from headquarters join us to talk about judging, because I really think that they can speak to it and really put power to word there. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So we can kick things off here.
Next slide.
Yeah. So to begin, I do want to iterate that what happened with the snow cancellation is really disappointing. I'm sure some of you know, but I am an alum. I'm a father, and I know many of us on the chat tonight are parents, they are volunteers, they are alumni, and so we all understand that it's really disappointing, and there's no sort of communication or email or anything that could be just more disappointing than seeing a kid who's just so deflated that Saturday morning because they didn't get to get their win, their one last win to showcase, especially so for the seniors. So I hope you all know that that resonates really deeply with us. We all are disappointed, we're upset, and it makes us really want to try harder to figure out how to better plan and how to make this not happen, help make this preventable. So that's the top. I will pass it over to Shelley. I don't want to spend too much time here. But yeah, I would really want to echo everyone's sentiment here and know that it's felt here, especially in First Chesapeake.
Thanks, Alex. So first, I just want to thank everyone who's come tonight to listen in and share their thoughts and their questions. To Alex's point, and I don't think any of us can really express the disappointment in a way that is truly telling. We know that this was not the way that you wanted to end your season. And although we've been able to take steps in order to bring the makeup event to bear so that you have the ability to do the robotics portion of the competition, it's not the same as if FTC Champs had gone off the way that it was supposed to on February 8th. So just to recap, the reason why we're here is that at the end of the day, weather is unpredictable, as I think all of you know. Weather has impacted most of our January events. And when we have these situations, safety has to come first. And so the weather cancellation led to us having to pivot real time for the event. We're a small team, right? 4, 5 of us on staff. And we work really hard to bring you guys the events that we do. And when we have these challenges, it's so reassuring whenever the community can help pitch in, which is really what led to us being able to bring together the makeup event as we were. We we want to see teams be able to showcase their efforts this season. And so that's why we worked with headquarters as well as the community in order to bring a replacement event. Again, not identical to what would have been in place, but something that will allow students and teams to showcase their efforts this season, particularly at this juncture, right, as we end. So we know how much the event meant to you. It means equal amounts of importance to us, and we do hope that as you move into that final competition, that you remember that whatever that final competition looks like, that it's not what defines who you guys are as a team, but rather your resilience, your ability to iterate, to persevere, and to continue moving forward. And so we thank you for that. Then the next item that we're going to be looking at is just moving into judging and talking more about our overall commitment to you, and what we're doing behind the scenes in order to bring you guys the events that we do. So next slide. All right. So Rachel is going to talk a little bit about the judging.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Rachel Moore, Senior Director of First Tech Challenge, and I'm here with Joanne, who's also a longtime First HQ staff member who specializes in judging. Quick introduction, if you don't know myself, I'm also an alumni, an FRC alumni. I'm a little too old to be an FTC alumni, but we work very closely with our partners like First Chesapeake to ensure that all of our events are the best they possibly can be. And I really want to thank Shelly and Alex, who were in constant communication throughout the event, reaching out to us, asking for advice, trying to figure out the best thing we could do in the moment. Keeping in mind that there is not a single event ever that was ever run perfectly. They are all run by great program delivery partners and a lot of volunteers doing their very best to create a great experience for students and for the teams, right? So I want to let you know that we are aware of the process. We have talked to a number of different teams. We do have a very small number of concerns that were brought to our attention, and we worked with Shelly and Alex to look into those and understand what they were. Given that this was not an ideal situation, compromises had to be made to come up with the best outcome possible. That all being said, keep in mind, judging is not a perfect process. Judging is about giving students an opportunity to work with other caring adults, the judges, to learn about their robots and explain what they've done for their season, right? And so it is inherently a little bit of a subjective process, but it's the opportunity to celebrate teams who have done well at a task, not always finding the perfect. There is not a way to find the perfect team because all teams are really excellent in a number of things. And so judging is about celebrating teams who've done a really good job at different awards, and those awards are based around celebrating things about our community that we culturally celebrate. So I think that given the opportunity, the options, and the time given, Shelly and Alex did a great job of pivoting. Is it exactly what you expected the day when you walked in? Probably not, but that's a little bit of life and a little bit of a life lesson. And I think Shelly made a comment earlier about, if you set the outcome of your event as the only thing you use to judge your season success by, ultimately there are a limited number of award winners and a limited number of robot winners. And so finding ways to celebrate what your team has done well, in addition to winning awards, but also how you got there and where you got in the process, should be a part of your team's season celebration. So given that, talking with Shelly and Alex, I know that they're committed to putting as much forethought in possible to plan for the unexpected in the future. And it sounds like there were already several weather incidents that they had to work through, and that's just kind of the nature of weather and the unexpected. And you have to work within the venue requirements, but also safety is really important, and that is ultimately more important than the actual outcome of the robot. And so it is unusual to split the tournament into two pieces, but I'm really excited to see that what you guys have been able to do and what the volunteers in your community have been willing to step up and do to make this second event happen. So I think we're going to pass it over to Shelly to talk about what all it takes to run an event like this, and how maybe give you all a little more perspective about why there wasn't an immediate answer on Saturday about what was going to happen next.
Thanks. So before we move into the way Alex described it, how the sausage is made, I do want to just make sure folks understand how we did judging the day of when we did that pivot, because I do think that there might be some confusion on how that was managed. So first and foremost, because we had about 3 hours to work with on the day of, the goal was to give as many teams that in-person experience that they could possibly have with the limited time that we had. So we did the morning interviews from 8 to 10 like normal, the same interviews that you would have had if the event had been run as it typically is. From there, we moved into a short list, for lack of a better term. So each panel of judges nominated teams that they wanted to potentially go and do a pit interview with. Now, remember, in a traditional event, pit judges would be going to lots and lots of teams, but we were condensed to a very short amount of time, about an hour. And so the judges had 30 minutes to deliberate over who their top choices were, and then an hour to go in and talk to those individual teams in a very quick way. From there, the teams were then ranked based on the top teams per award, and then that was done by division. And then from there, we utilized virtual judging as a way to give teams a little bit more time with the judge panels. And so those teams that were nominated were then re-interviewed by our judges virtually on Sunday. And then after that was completed, then final deliberations were done around the top awards, the Inspire Awards. It is very important that everyone understands, we know that this was not an ideal situation. We know that we would have wanted it to be longer and more like a traditional situation. However, we had to be striking and out of the building at 11:30, and so we were forced to work with a very constrained amount of time. And in doing so, we were able to interview, and the judges were able to determine who the top award winners were. And so it's just very important to me that you all are aware of that, because I did have several teams ask why they were visited by pit judges but weren't invited back for the Sunday interview. And the reason for that is that only 2 teams for each award from each division were invited back. And then from those, some teams, right, just like is typical, were interviewed for multiple awards, which led to the ultimate selections around Inspire. So all conflict of interest that people have had concerns about were managed by division on day of, and then people were 100% excluded and recused from judging for the panels and the Inspire deliberations. And so again, just to reiterate that we worked really hard to make it as equitable and as conflict little as possible. And we'll take questions at the end around judging if you have additional questions. But now we'll dig into, if you want to jump to the next slide. These are some of the things that were raised. And so some people did say that pit judging was rushed, and it was. You're right. We did our best to be as efficient as possible, considering the time constraints we were under. There was one report of one team getting 7 minutes while another got 10. Again, that may have happened, particularly at the start of judging when we were real-time pivoting and trying to get this underway as quickly as possible. Some teams didn't get any pit judges, and that is also true because once pit judges started doing their interviews, they had narrowed down the field of who they were going to interview out of necessity. I've gotten two teams, 3 emails, who've reported some inconsistencies or errors with feedback forms. We do recognize that there were a couple of errors with regard to that, and we are looking into it. It does appear that the folks that experienced that were from the same set of judges and that they were new judges. And so again, under those circumstances, not ideal. That could have led to some inaccuracies there. And we do recognize that you all want to showcase your work, and so it is one of the reasons why we pivoted to virtual, and so hopefully now that you have a better understanding of what we were doing real time, it helps. And just to reiterate what Rachel said earlier, that these are all noted situations that we're aware of, but ultimately based on our assessment of what we did real time, the results are fair and accurate, and we're moving forward with the results as they are. So does anyone have anything else to add?
I was going to jump in, Shell, if you don't mind.
Please.
So everything about this process is the judging process. I would encourage anybody on the call tonight to go and read the judge manual or the judge advisor manual. Both of those are public documents for First Tech Challenge. Any team can go and read them and see the process. So everything about the process of talking to teams, narrowing down, talking to teams again, narrowing down, talking to teams again, all of that is the normal judging process. What was not as normal about this is, going in, you expect to have a day and the whole thing to go together. That obviously was not normal. And the same thing with, like, normally we do more pit interviews to talk to more teams, but some of that is about the student experience talking to the judges, and some of that is about continuing to narrow down awards. So everything about this process follows the method that is laid out in the judging and judge advisor handbooks. The difference is obviously there's not normally a follow-up virtual interview, right? Normally that would happen on the same day. And so this pivot follows that process. It just adapts for the situation. And we want teams to have more time to talk to judges, of course, but it's about making equitable experience for the teams. Maybe not the ideal. And so, yes, there maybe were a little shorter interactions than we would have wanted, but everyone on the whole got the same amount of opportunity to interact with the judges. And that's really what we wanted to see in terms of, we have to make the best with what we have available. And I think that First Chesapeake has done a good job of trying to take all of the essence and key components of judging and apply them in a way that works for all the teams, in a way that's equitable to all of them within the bounds of having to do it in a very short order.
Thanks, Rachel. So if we move on to the next slide, one thing that is important, because I did hear this on the day of, and there was chatter in various places about why Chesapeake didn't have a backup ready for championship. And so it became evident to me that I've not done a good job in ensuring that the community understands what we're doing behind the scenes to bring events to you. And so that was another reason why the town hall seemed appropriate, in order to share with you a little bit more about how we do things. So putting together a season of events for our district really starts about a year and a half ahead of time. It's a long process. So I began looking for and soliciting venues back in November of 2023, 2024. Like, I don't even know what year I'm in. 2023. Yeah, leading up to now. And so we generally will start by going back to trusted hosts, right? So people who have hosted in the past, we will ask them if they want to host again. We also solicit new hosts and do site visits and interact with people at events to say, hey, we'd love to be in this geography, or we'd love to enter this school district. Do you have a connection that we can work with? The reality is that for as hard as we try to have things set in stone, changes do happen real time, unexpectedly. And so during this season, to be ready for 24-25, we actually had 2 venues drop out last minute that required pivots real time so that we could have enough venues to secure 2 qualifiers for all the teams, even though they weren't necessarily in ideal locations. And I bring that forward because even with our best efforts in terms of trying to put the jigsaw puzzle together, there are still times when things happen. And so we have to be ready for those eventualities. This season, we needed 18 venues, 1 for championship and then 17 for qualifiers. On the whole, we need about 18 venues per year, full stop, in order to support our growing FTC community. And so just want to make sure that everyone's aware of where we are right now. So moving into the thing that caused us the most strife, so this will be the next slide, is what, oh, sorry, is we'll talk about the different locations. And so we have high demand areas where we try to have multiple events, and then we have our single event locations that are sort of either on the peripheral of our large district, which for those of you who are new, covers DC, Maryland, Virginia, and parts of West Virginia. And so we essentially cover 4 states, and we do so as equitably as we can. And so these are some of the areas that we look in, and we are always striving to strike a balance between location and ensuring that we have enough venues to support the amount of events that we need. You can pop to the next one. Okay, so obviously weather is the bane of all things right now for me as a person trying to plan. And this season, the reality was we had 3 weekends in January impacted by weather. In the previous season, we only had 1. And so in this season, we had, with that being said, there's a need for contingency planning, but we don't always have the venues or the reserve space to support those sudden changes. So this season in planning, we only had 1 venue that was able to secure a Saturday competition and a Sunday backup day if it was needed. And that was in December when we didn't need it. And so none of the January events had capacity to do a Saturday reserve Sunday or vice versa. They either could only do a Sunday, or we needed them to do both Saturday and Sunday to ensure there were enough qualifiers so everyone got 2 plays. Also, when we close, we don't close because we want to. We cancel and close events because the venue requires us to do that. And so had it been up to me on February 8th, we would have stayed, but it wasn't up to me. The school district made the call because of safety, and we follow through with what that call is. And so we are exploring second day options. That is something we would love to be able to do from the start of the season to the end. But we need venues that can do that. And for this season, we just didn't have that availability. And then finally, looking forward, what we need from you all as the community is to understand that when there are disruptions, when there are cancellations or changes, we will do everything in our power in order to manage it, but we can't always navigate it in a planned way if we don't have the venues secured ahead of the season. Next slide. So our hosts are critical to our success as a district. And it is an enormous commitment that event hosts take on. And I'm not entirely sure that our community on the whole understands just how many hours are spent preparing and then executing the event. For many of our hosts, it's on the manner of 40 to 120 hours, depending upon the circumstances. If it's a Saturday, Sunday versus a Saturday only, if they're new hosts or newer hosts, there's just so much that goes into it, and it's a tremendous commitment. The reality at Chesapeake is that this season we had 267 teams. And when I started planning our season to figure out where we were going to go, where we are going to get plugged in, I had 9 host applications. So 9 host applications for all the teams. And that's simply not sustainable. And so right now, our veteran hosts really carry the burden of our community on whole, right? So they hold 1 or 2 day events. They come back year over year. They continue to step up and be the group that sort of gives us the events that we need in order to ensure enough qualifiers are out there. But we need more teams and more of our community to help every season. And so we need more schools, we need more community centers, we need more higher ed area, places like universities or community colleges. And I need those connections from our community. Without them, I continue to go back to the same folks over and over, and they are burdened with carrying the weight of all of us. So thinking about what's next in terms of planning, you can go to the next slide. So just so you know who we are, in case you don't. So Alex is our executive director. He works primarily with partnership strategy and supporting mentors. If you don't know me, I'm the director of FTC, Shelley. I work on the FTC program, the Women in STEM program, STEM hubs, and a mentor development program. And I assist Alex with all things donor and partner related. Isaiah is our director of FRC, and he's in charge of FRC program and alumni engagement. And then Ann Shade is our director of operations, and she manages our equipment, event execution, logistics, the warehouse operations. And then Amber is in charge of our FLL Explore program and out of Maryland. And so that's us. That's all of us. That's the staff. We have volunteer support from some key people who do above and beyond what is typical of a volunteer. And so we do have Jen Charles, who's our district volunteer coordinator. She helps with a tremendous amount of our engagement, training, and recruitment and retention of volunteers on the whole. We have our senior district volunteer liaisons, and Vania, Erin, Paula, and Megan are really, not only are they doing things like helping us with communicating with our volunteers, but they're also doing tremendous amounts of recruitment, boots on the ground in certain regions. And so they're a tremendous assist when it comes to volunteer recruitment, but we continue to need more, as is typical. And then lastly, the folks that you may not be aware of is Selig Sinton is our first senior mentor, and he's out of Maryland. And then Doc Davies is our Virginia FSM, or first senior mentor. And they work directly with FIRST in partnership with us to help with a number of goals, sometimes related to team growth, team sustainability, sometimes volunteer recruitment and community outreach. Those goals are sometimes determined by geography, but they are also determined by the needs of our community. And so, but this is your team. So for the 267 FTC teams and the 117-ish FRC teams, and Amber, I don't know how many, I think we're at 90 something FLL Explore teams.
98.
98. So for all of those teams and all of those events and all of that program that we offer and bring to you all, this is our staff and our volunteer support system. You can go to the next slide. And thank God for all of these people. So our role at Chesapeake when it comes to an event are to ensure that you have the equipment, technology, and infrastructure that's needed in order to execute the event. We help support, recruit, and retain lead volunteers. So these are going to be people like your head JA, your head referee, folks like that. We work on process development in order to make event planning and execution standardized, sustainable, consistent, so that one event is not very different from another across the district. And then we do a tremendous amount with the administrative and partnership tasks in terms of team management, registration, and then securing partners to help support what we do. We also have a tremendous amount of leadership with the community. And so we have our FTC and FRC planning committees. These are the event planning groups. It's generally 3 people that make up that group: a site liaison, event manager, and volunteer coordinator. We also have our volunteer advisory committees. We have one for each program. We have our senior volunteer roles, which I mentioned earlier. Our team advisory committees, and those, like our VACs or volunteer advisory committees, meet once a month. And then lastly, we're hoping to launch our student advisory committees in 2025. So there's a tremendous amount of leadership out in our community that helps us when we are trying to determine a new process or a new way of doing things, or we have a question about something. We don't make our decisions in isolation or just among a very small group of people. We do go to our advisory committees and our leadership in the volunteers in order to get their input. You can go to the next slide. So the hosts, as I said before, have just a tremendous amount of work that they do in order to execute an event. This is just a sort of snapshot from August to January of the various hours that might be used in executing an event. I don't say this in order to like scare people away from being an event host, but what I do want to show is that when you go to an event and the doors are open and you have a fantastic time and you leave feeling jazzed and psyched and have enjoyed yourself, the reason for that is because of the volunteers that have executed that event. And this is the kind of time that they've put into it in order to bring it to bear. So I just want to make sure that that's known. You can go to the next slide. Again, I've said before, the events don't just happen. So I know it may seem as though the doors open and there's like a field there and people just show up and it's like magic. The reality is that if you've experienced a great event, it's because you had a great host who did a bunch of work behind the scenes in order to make that event fantastic. It is also worth noting that our events cannot occur without the support of our volunteers. They are 100% driven by volunteers. Clearly, given that there's such a small amount of us on the on staff. And so, you know, for a 36 team event on the FTC side of things, it's somewhere on the range of 80 to 100 volunteers, depending upon the needs of that particular venue. And so there's a list there of just a few places, a few roles that are needed, but it's a tremendous amount of people that go into making the event what it is. You can go on to the next slide. So we have 3 programs, as I mentioned before: FLL Explore, FTC, and FRC. And we really are balancing all the programs as well as the season timelines when it comes to equipment. And so that was something that was brought to bear whenever we had the cancellation due to the snow event at Championship, was like, well, just find another venue and just do it somewhere else. And the reality is that the equipment that we use on the FTC side of things, we also use in FRC. And so because that equipment is shared, we have limited amount of time for the turnover. So from FTC, getting back to the warehouse, reshuffling everything, and getting new sets of pods packed to move on to FRC. And I say this to ensure that everyone understands that that schedule is really tight. And so for us to do this makeup event, just to put it in perspective for everyone, we can't use a pod because there isn't enough time, and because we don't have sufficient equipment to go into the pod. So we're actually using our warehouse in order to do equipment delivery. And much of what you would expect at a traditional event, we won't be able to have at this event because it's going to the next program, as is the norm for us as an organization that hosts multiple programs over the course of a season. And so that creates a constraint in terms of our timeline, but it also requires us to be thinking about multiple things whenever we are trying to determine how to solve a problem real time. And so I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. It's all interconnected. Next slide. So you guys are critical to all of this. As we plan for the next season, we need the support of our community in order to do that. Right now, the event host form that I use to see who's interested has been out since November of 2024. We need 18 venues for next season. I have 9 responses again. So I need your help to have more interest, and I need you all to reach out to your schools. I need you to advocate with your leadership in order to bring this forward so that schools will support events like ours. We want to be a selected sporting-like event at your schools. And in order for us to do that, the teams that are housed in those schools have to advocate for us too. And we want to connect with those schools ahead of it being an emergency. So I can't tell you how thankful I was for the hard work that so many people did, teams and volunteers alike, in just getting out the word that, like, we're desperate, we got to have something. It was incredible, the folks that came forward with ideas and lists. And but I don't want a repeat of this. I don't think anybody does. And so I need those lists of potential venues now. And I need to be able to work with those people now to secure them for next season. I don't want to have to beg people to step in the gap when there's an emergency. And that's where we'll be again if I don't have more venues and more people expressing interest. Next slide. So again, this is just more detail about where we are right now. The veteran hosts continue to carry the weight of all the events that we're offering to our community. I do think it's worth mentioning that this year, of the 9 applications I have, 3 are brand new hosts, which is a tremendous thing to take on, and we're so excited about that. 3 are FRC teams willing to do outreach opportunities by hosting for us on their off season, and 3 are returning hosts. So again, we need your help in order to avoid this kind of situation in the future, and we can't do it without your help. Next slide. So we've already talked through that. You can go to the next one. All right. So I'm a little ahead of schedule. I did a lot of talking there. So just want to open it up for some live questions. So yeah, so I'm working with our JAs with the, I don't know that I would use the word investigation, but I'm working with our JAs to determine the errors on those judging sheets and if the errors were just clerical, which is where we believe the issue is now, versus something more serious.
Let me jump in on that for a second.
Sure.
The judging sheets we're talking about are interview feedback sheets, and so these sheets give teams an idea about how they performed during the formal interview portion of the judging process, which is only one of 3 different ways that team information is kind of ingested into the judging process. And so those feedback sheets are intended to help give you some guidance about how your team's presentation to the judges was heard or understood by those judges. And so it really is specific to those judges' impression of your presentation, and it is very much based and only based on your presentation and the Q&A. So it does not include any of the pit interviews that may have occurred or any of the other deliberations or looking at your portfolio or any of those other things. So it is a tiny window of feedback into how the judges perceive that. So it's not, this judging sheet is not like a scoring rubric that's going to like total up and help determine a winner. This is just the impression the judges had based on your formal interview.
I'm happy to take this one. So, we did not make that call. The school board of Montgomery County Public Schools made that call. We asked earlier for them to make an earlier call. They chose until 6 a.m. when we were already in the building to make that call. As Shelley said, we would have loved to have stayed. We spent all day Friday setting up. We much would have preferred to have played and stayed, but it is not our decision. And we are guests in that school and in that school system, and so we have to abide by their rules. So have we looked into FRC teams hosting? Yes, we have. FRC teams make excellent hosts. As Shelley shared, I believe a majority of the teams that we have committed right now are FRC teams. We understand it's a huge burden when we get into the January season for FRC teams to host. We do have a couple, and in fact, the makeup event is hosted by the Powerhawks. So they are going out of their way, stopping their FRC season to help make this happen. And we're so appreciative of them for that. Absolutely. So this is venue requirements. So we have a venue document that's on our website. I believe if you go to firstchesapeake.org/host, you can see all the requirements for FRC and FTC. We need to have at least a site liaison, usually an educator or a teacher administrator who is in the building or with the facilities who can legally say yes, we can come. And then we need an event manager as well as a venue volunteer coordinator. And so those are the kind of 3 main pieces. We like to have a tour of the venue so we can see sizes. Most schools can accommodate FTC. It really just comes down to how many teams we can fit in a venue. And as we shared, we have a large amount of teams, and so we really want to maximize that space and maximize the ability to stretch up if we could. For instance, our friends over in West Virginia were able to stretch to 54 teams, which allowed us to accommodate some snow cancellation events earlier in the season. Having that option was really essential and meant that we got everyone all of their plays that they could do.
Yep, I can take this one. So the question is, how has Inspire been decided when no robot game has happened? The Inspire Award is based on the team's performance in the three main categories: TA, Team Attribute Awards, MCI Award, the Machine Creativity and Innovation Awards, and the Think Award, which is based on the portfolio. And so a team needs to rank in each of those three categories to be considered for the Inspire Award. So that's how the Inspire Award is an overall kind of award. And yes, some of the MCI awards do consider robot performance, but they aren't a hard requirement or the primary requirement for that. And so because no teams had robot performance, it was a reasonable compromise to not have that information present when determining judging, because the primary purpose for those awards is about the ability of the team to express what they have done towards that award. If you open the competition manual, it describes how the Inspire Award is a composite of those three award categories. And then it also goes down to break down into each of the individual awards. What are the required and encouraged components of that the judges would use to evaluate rankings? So I can take a portion of this, but I think Chesapeake will probably want to give more specific details. When you
I'm
cancel
happy to speak to this. So I think the inquiry is around the dollars that were collected for registration. That money was spent for the first round. So it goes to venue fees, custodial, volunteer food, supplies. So it's gone. I want to be clear, the event that's happening is totally out of pocket for First Chesapeake, and all of the host and all of that is just going to come from would just be a deficit for the FTC program. So just as we're thinking about what it costs to take this to run this program, I think roughly it's around $133,000 annually, and that does not include any staff time. So that does not include my salary or Shelly's salary or Anne's salary, nor any of the overhead and administrative things that come with that. That is purely to run the program, as if we were all volunteers. Before this year, before the increase of the registration, FTC consistently lost anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 for First Chesapeake, which meant that our FRC teams were making up the difference for this program. So we are getting into the black. We have a tiny surplus that is now exhausted for this championship. But that's just the reality of this program. It's very bare bones. What we raise, we spend on the program that year, and we seek sponsorships and grants to support all of the extracurricular things. So in order to streamline operations for the event that will be in less than 2 weeks, we have chosen not to do any AV. There is a piece of this where all of our AV is in a pod currently and is en route to week 0 events. But in a more realistic way, we know that we have very tech savvy folks. We know that we have people who are quite generous with their time and with their equipment. And while, yes, they could piece it together and they could make it work, it is not worth the extra stress that puts on all of the other volunteers who we are now double tapping and pulling from across the district and importing from the nation to make this event happen. So that's why we pared this down. We really want to make sure it's about the match play and not about the production or the show.
We are also, just to piggyback on that, we also are using a different timeline for this event. So we ordinarily will enter a building at 6 a.m. We ordinarily have 3 to 5 hours the evening before in order for setup to occur. And this is a much abbreviated schedule because that's what the venue we are going to has allowed us to utilize. And so in order to streamline that process, that also requires that in some instances, like AV as the example, be removed from the overall event plan simply because of how much time it takes to get those things set up compared to the time that we have for the remainder of the setup.
Yeah, in working with Alex and Shelley, we talked about the options here, and we felt that it was most important to prioritize teams getting to play these matches. That was our number one goal. And so making sure we put the nice to haves to the side so that we could do what we considered a must and accomplish this really Herculean task to schedule an event on top of a bunch of other events that are happening in a venue that didn't exist, with a bunch of contracts that didn't exist, and all these other things. And so making sure we were able to put the priority on the team robot play experience as being the number one priority. Headquarters is also supporting this effort and sending some extra volunteers, this kind of thing. And so while we obviously would all want the championship to have nice AV setup, it is not worth risking the team experience for gameplay.
So I think I will take this question.
Right.
The original round judges, I'm making the assumption we're talking about the day of in-person judges. So anyone that was part of the original in-person judging was asked to be a part of the deliberation virtually that happened that afternoon, and then were asked to be a part of deliberation on Sunday and part of the virtual judging that was offered for teams that were asked to come back for a second interview. The only people that were excluded were those that had a conflict of interest on day 2 that we weren't able to avoid because things had then become one set of awards as opposed to looking at things from 2 divisions.
Advancement will work exactly as described in the official competition manual. If you go to the advancement section in section 4, it lists the order in which teams will advance. And so Inspire First Place Award will be the first one, going down from there in the order from table 4-1. We will use the awards results from the first event judging, and we will use the robot performance from the event that's upcoming.
So the virtual portion was not a pin interview, just to be clear. The virtual portion was a follow-up interview with teams who were narrowed down for a short list of awards. Also, to share, the virtual interview portion it was an additional 4 or 5 hours on Saturday and an additional 4 or 5 hours on Saturday or on Sunday. So it was overall a longer experience for the judges. They'd had more time to deliberate, and they really did take that into consideration. And they used all of the time that was allotted. So I would say that they were less rushed than they would have been in a traditional setting.
I can speak to that one. So yes, this season we employed a new process for judge vetting, and that is to utilize a survey that the volunteer coordinator or myself would review to ensure that there was no team affiliation if we can avoid it. So I need to ensure that everyone understands sometimes conflicts of interest cannot be avoided. That we are a huge community, but we are also a small community. And so if you have been a part of the community for any length of time, you probably have affiliations with many teams. I have affiliations with teams, right? Because my kids are on a team and my kids are now on a new team. And so so we do what we can in order to mitigate that. We start with a survey in order to ensure that judges share what their affiliations are, and then we double check those affiliations against those who are competing at the event. The second thing we do is that the JA of the event then sends out a second round of vetting where they will ask once again who is affiliated with whom. That information is used to determine if that judge is appropriate or not for that event. On the day of the event, they are asked again to share any kinds of affiliations. And at that point, the JA makes real-time decisions on who may have a conflict, if they can be a part of interviews or not for specific teams. For our championship event, we did, because we had dual division, we did have people with team affiliations judging on one division that may have had an affiliation on the other division. And again, that is out of necessity, because without having the divisions and the ability to do that, we would not have had enough judges to even move forward with the event and give you guys the judging that you required. So those are sort of the 3 steps that we use for championship day of, whenever we moved to the virtual aspect of things, to ensure that there was no conflict once we went from divisions down to single event. Because again, there's only one set of awards, even though there are two divisions moving into it. Anyone that had a conflict of interest was recused from that virtual session. So we do just have like 4 minutes left. And so to be cognizant of time, both for those of you out there watching and listening, but also to the folks here that are on the panel, I think we could probably take 2 more questions, and then we'll close out for the evening. Rachel or Joanne, I don't know if you guys want to speak to this, but in terms of talking through the best ways forward, if you have concerns, or if you want a question to be answered, what the best way forward on that, both from Chesapeake and First Headquarters, probably be worthwhile too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you guys have, Chesapeake has a feedback website, and I don't know if we can pop that up somewhere at some point. That is absolutely working with your local leadership, and your local volunteer leadership is the best way to affect change in your region. We appreciate the feedback at the headquarters level. We like to know what's going on, but our very first step is going to be to come and talk to Chesapeake and try and understand more about the details. First Tech Challenge has a staff of 9 full-time people, including myself, for over 8,000 teams worldwide. And so we do try to stay involved in what happens at the local level around the world. But as you can imagine, we're a little bit distant from Chesapeake. And so the best way to get change is to work with your partners in your region. You guys are all very lucky to have partners that are so engaged and dedicated and knowledgeable at this program. And find more volunteers. Like, if you are concerned about the quality of the volunteers, teams should help find qualified people to fill those roles. And it is extra time if you go to an event that none of the teams that you're with are at. And so that's part of what it takes to make these events really good, is have that. And then at the same time, it's it sounds very much like Shelley has a great process for managing conflict of interest. And it's not because we want to eliminate everyone who knows something about FIRST from our judging. You can imagine we're going to have better judging outcomes when most of the judges are knowledgeable about FIRST and FIRST culture and FIRST values. And so it's more about managing, not putting people in a situation where they're unable to give fair, unbiased answers. Not because we think a lot of people are trying to break into the judging room and rig judging. It's really about putting people in situations where they can honestly share their opinions without having that bias in their answers. And so we're trying to set those judges and other volunteers up to succeed, and use their expertise in the program to give the teams the best outcome, or the most accurate outcome.
Sure. So, I mean, just off the top, in order for an event to run with 36 teams, we need a minimum of 12 judges in order to operate judging like normal. We prefer to have 14 to 16 judges, because inevitably people will call out on the day of competition because they're sick, or we sometimes find that someone didn't share all their affiliations until they're in the room. And after further discussion, we realize that, oh, this person may not be as good a fit as we thought. And so ideally, we have 14 to 16 judges for a 36-team event. That's the minimum that we aim for. This season, at all of our events, there were 2 where I had extra judges, meaning over the 12. 2 out of the entire season. So, yeah.
And I will say that globally speaking, recruiting judges is one of the hardest challenges that events face. It's very common that you can get more technical volunteers in for the key roles, referee, head referee, scorekeeper, and it's a little bit more tenable to have those folks have some association with teams at the event because what they're doing is out in the open and it is very procedural. Judging, because it is behind closed doors, really has to be very much above board, and so it is very difficult to recruit people into those roles.
All right, I think this will be our last question. So, just so everyone's clear, our divisions remain the same. We've only had, of the 54 teams, only 1 is not attending. So 53 of the 54 teams are coming to the March 2nd event. So the divisions will remain the same from original champs to makeup event champs on March 2nd. Just 1 team will not be listed. They're still in the list, though, because they are now listed in FTC score as judging only. So that's important. They will not be deleted as we have done in the past because our whole event is broken into 2 pieces. And so we cannot delete a team from FTC score who participated in judging in the event they received a judged award.
And to be clear, divisions are created by an algorithm, so we have no control over that. It's just part of the system. It runs it through. We have a volunteer who can share more about that algorithm and go much more into detail if you would like that conversation. But just understand that it's an algorithm.
And it was also in the last FTC newsletter. So go check it out and you can learn more about that. We want to thank everybody for coming. Alex, you want to close us out?
Yeah, happy to. I appreciate everyone being here. I appreciate the strong discussions that we had tonight. I really appreciate the student engagement. I don't know if you guys saw in there, we are starting a student advisory committee, and I would love for some of your voices to be on that committee. And for those of you who aren't students, I would recommend you consider joining one of the team advisory committees or a volunteer advisory committee. We are built on the collective reasoning and improvement of this community, and so it's so important to us to hear this feedback, to share why we went certain ways, to help you understand where we're thinking, and also just to be open to listen, because we're absolutely we would be the first to say that we're not doing everything 100%. I don't think anyone is, and this is a growing process. So we want to grow together as a community. We don't want to kind of set unrealistic expectations and arbitrary benchmarks. We want to do this together. So I really appreciate that. I know we shared the feedback link in there. Also in Slack, there's a CHS questions channel. We try and get to all of those at least sometimes, and oftentimes those questions in there are really good and you're not the only person thinking it. So please use that resource. And there's lots of other resources on Slack too. So always, we have channels. We really want to be open and communicative, and we want to be here to listen. So I know Shelly's got office hours. I'll plug those. We have these virtual forums. There's Slack. You can always send us an email. If you go to the website, you can message us. We all see that, and we will get back to you. So thank you. We appreciate your passion for this and striving to continue to be better.
Thank you, everyone.